What does it mean to be a prophet? What does it take to end up in a story like the Bible? In the Barbie movie, this is going somewhere. In the Barbie movie, who here has seen the Barbie movie? Okay, some of you. Okay, so in the Barbie movie, there is a character called Weird Barbie. Something has happened to Weird Barbie. The movie explains she was played with too hard, and now she looks different. She's always in the splits, her hair is going in different directions, there's paint on her face. And because of this, she is unable to be part of Barbie Land with the other Barbies. She is isolated, she is alienated, she's seen as a threat to the Barbiness of the other Barbies in Barbie Land. But when things start to go wrong, it's only Weird Barbie who can help. Her status as an outsider gives her the ability to speak prophetically, to speak about larger realities. And she's the one who's able to guide the main characters through their journey to rescue Barbie Land and themselves. So that's the Barbie movie. In today's reading from Genesis, something has happened to Joseph. His brothers sold him away into slavery, and he lost everything. Then during his time in Egypt as a slave, his ability to speak prophetically allowed him to speak truth to the leaders of that time and helped save the nation from devastating famine. And now in today's reading, his brothers have come back. Their own families are suffering under this famine, and they recognize Joseph. It is a moment of reconciliation, but also one that requires them to acknowledge the terrible thing that was done. Joseph speaks bluntly. He says, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt." But then he goes on to say, yes, this terrible thing happened. Then afterwards, I did great things. I did prophetic things. I spoke salvation and abundance and life into a situation of death and deprivation and despair. And the brothers fall onto one another and weep. It is a moment of beautiful reconciliation, but that reconciliation, by definition, comes after a terrible, terrible betrayal. And then we have today's gospel. It's a weird one, and I know we are all missing Debbie as she's off at seminary, but I'm here. In today's gospel, there is a woman. Something has happened to this woman and her family. Her daughter is afflicted by a demon, and now they find themselves as Canaanites among Israelites. She is isolated, she is alienated, she is seen as a threat, and she pleads with the healer Jesus for help, and he responds uncharitably. In this moment of terrible betrayal, her last chance, this man she's heard so much about, who's supposed to be this bastion of love and inclusion, she finds herself faced with isolation. But in that moment, this moment of despair, this moment of last chance, this moment of misery, she speaks prophetically. She reminds Jesus of his power and his identity in his stated mission. She reflects the mercy and charity of his own teachings back to him. And he responds, as we see, by shifting his attitude, by praising her faith and healing her daughter. Now, how many of us can say something that cool? I reminded Jesus of his own values. I called Jesus Christ himself back into a posture of generosity and grace. I spoke the voice of truth to the Word himself. I prophesied to the Son of God. And now she is immortalized forever, though nameless, like many of the women in our tradition. Though nameless, we remember her, and she comes out looking pretty good in this story. And it's not just any story, it is the story, the gospel. To be a prophet means to speak God's truth, God's righteousness, God's grace, and it sounds pretty cool. the opportunity to channel something so powerful, the glory of being a figure able to bring, to embody salvation and redemption. But really think about the circumstances of all the prophets, Weird Barbie included, whose stories we're sitting with today. They all start with terrible things. And their most powerful moments of prophecy all take place in the depths of sorrow, of isolation, of trouble. What's the message? What's the theme? If we want to be part of the story God is telling about healing and repair, we must step fully into a story of profound brokenness. If we want to be part of God's great story of forgiveness and mercy and reconciliation, we must also accept that this is a story that includes awful betrayal and hurt. And I want to stop here and be really clear about my theology and the theology of what I'm doing with this sermon. I'm not making the claim that God causes bad things to happen to us as part of this plan, like some puppeteer directing a larger vision without regard for the suffering of the individuals involved in those moments. I think that when Joseph's brothers threw him into that pit and he was in that moment of terrible betrayal and despair, I don't think God was going, hang in there, buddy. This will build character, I promise. It'll all be worth it. I'm doing something. Don't worry about it. I think in that moment, God's heart broke for Joseph. I think God was fully present to the despair and the betrayal, and I think God grieved with Joseph for all that had been lost. And I think the same is true of the Canaanite woman and her daughter. Whatever condition the daughter had, we hear she was afflicted by a demon. Something was preventing her from living fully and joyously in the inclusion of her community. Whatever was going on with her, whatever separation and alienation these two women were suffering, I don't think God was just putting them through the ringer for the sake of a gospel lesson. It'll all be worth it. I'm doing something. I do not think that God rejoices in or cultivates brokenness in our world or in our lives. But we cannot deny that there is brokenness in our world and in our lives. And I think God wishes to be very present in it and in its ultimate redemption. I believe God is working out great, incredible things. And if you want to create a spectacular repair, then a massive breach is the place to start. If God is going to show us just how amazing, just how incredible, just how big God's divine healing is, well, a grievous wound would be the stage for that show. Which means if we heard those stories today and thought, that sounds pretty cool, that sounds like something I want for me. If we want to be prophetic vessels for God's ability to repair the damaged places in our world and in our hearts, then we need to be in those places. If we are going to speak truth, then we must be willing to face falsehood. And if we want to live out mercy and grace, we are going to have to live amongst pain and cruelty. Today's epistle reminds us that disobedience is the site of mercy. It happens together. It is an awesome and amazing and joyful and exciting thing to offer ourselves up to God. Use me. I want to be part of your great story, right? But it's also a scary thing, right? Who among us wouldn't want to have a part to play in God's amazing work of love and healing? But in order to participate in redemption and reconciliation, you must be fully present to what comes first. Today we are blessed to have a baptism. Where's Elias? Hi. We are blessed to have a baptism here today in our community, which means that we will all stand up and we will all be present for and we will all speak together the baptismal covenant. We will be offered the opportunity to be prophets, to speak and to do and to live God's truth and love and wisdom. And when asked that question, we will say, I will, with God's help. This is a covenant, an agreement made between two or more beings within a community. As part of this covenant, we promise that we will walk in God's ways, that we will actively try to help tell and live out God's story. And we stand in God's returned promise that we will not be alone in this work. That if we step up to live as prophets, telling the story of God's redemptive love, God's loving presence will flow through us in the form of truth-telling and kingdom building. Bringing a child into the world, bringing a child here to be baptized, choosing to become a foster parent, as I did, anything like that is both scary and exciting. Working with children, and all of us here today are going to make a commitment to this young person and to this community to be present in that young person's life. Working with children as a family member, as a teacher, as a mentor, as a friend, is, I believe, prophetic work. It means showing up every single day to face all manner of brokenness. Messed up Barbies, skinned knees, a first lost friendship, a failed test. Showing up every day to the brokenness in our world and being willing to bring a presence of love and joy and hope and grace to whatever situation arises with that young person. And it is not easy to be present to a child coping with brokenness in the world. It is frustrating. It is irritating at times. It is difficult. It is confusing, but it's so worth it. That's why we're here today. We all think it's worth it. Those moments of frustration or pain or loneliness or screaming are the times when our children and the children of our community need us the most. And I think, like God with Joseph and all of God's children, we do not ever hope that our children will suffer, but we know that they will, and we promise to be there when they do inevitably face the brokenness. We want to do our best to stand in that moment as prophets, to reflect God's holy presence, to witness, and to speak into those moments. Our baptismal covenant is just one way we express our desire to play a prophetic role in helping to tell God's story of salvation and healing. Today we're going to state our willingness to step into a broken world with the knowledge that in that brokenness is the place where God's work can and will be done. For our children, for our world, for our prophetic work, we say, whatever happens, I want to be there. No matter how painful or difficult or confusing it is, I will not shy away. I will wait for God's healing. I will speak God's redemption, and I will do that in the places where it is most profoundly at work. If you want to participate in the work of healing, you must be where the wounds are. And fortunately for all of us, that is where we are. In our own families, in our own hearts, in our own world, we are blessed every day with the opportunity to speak prophetically and to help our amazing God tell the greatest story of all time. We can choose to let the reality of God's loving truth flow into us, knowing that, like water, the places where it flows are often deep and frightening. And we might not end up immortalized in a Greta Gerwig movie, although you should go see it, or a holy scripture. I think that ship has sailed for most of us to end up in the Bible. But like Weird Barbie or Joseph or the Canaanite woman, we all have a chance every single day to be present to the brokenness where God is most at work, letting it move through us, living as prophets with the holy and blessed work of helping tell God's great story.